It was 9:30 on Christmas Eve, as I crossed the long entrance hall of Monk's Peace on my way from the dining room, where we had just enjoyed the first of the happy, festive meals, toward the drawing room and the fire around which my family were now assembled. I paused, and then, as I often do in the course of an evening, went to the front door, opened it, and stepped outside. I've always liked to take a breath of the evening, to smell the air, whether it is sweetly scented and balmy with the flowers of midsummer, pungent with the bonfires and leaf mould of autumn, or crackling cold from the frost and snow. I like to look about me at the sky above my head, whether there are moon and stars or utter blackness. And into the darkness ahead of me, I like to listen for the cries of nocturnal creatures and the moaning rise and fall of the wind, or the pattering of rain in the orchard trees. I enjoy the rush of air towards me up the hill from the flat pastures of the river valley. Tonight, I smelled at once, and with a lightning heart, that there had been a change in the weather. All the previous week we had had rain, chilling rain, and a mist that lay low about the house and over the countryside. From the windows the view stretched no farther than a yard or two down the garden. It was wretched weather, never seeming to come fully light, and raw too. There had been no pleasure in walking, the visibility was too poor for any shooting, and the dogs were permanently morose and muddy. Inside the house, the lamps were lit throughout the day, and the walls of larder, outhouse and cellar oozed damp and smelled sour. The fires sputtered and smoked, burning dismally low. My spirits have for many years now been excessively affected by the ways of the weather, and I confess that, had it not been for the air of cheerfulness and bustle that prevailed in the rest of the house, I should have been quite cast down in the gloom and lethargy, unable to enjoy the flavour of life as I should like, and irritated by my own susceptibility. But Esme is merely stung by inclement weather into a spirited defiance, and so the preparations for our Christmas holiday had this year been more than usually extensive and vigorous. Welcome everybody to the Bookish Report. My name is A.B. Frank, but just call me Alex, and today this is something that I've been waiting to do for a long time and putting it off, and now I'm finally doing it. It's the review of The Woman in Black by Susan Hill, the 1983 classic. Now this is the quintessential ghost story, and I'll read you the plot, the blurb off the back. Arthur Kipps, a junior solicitor, is summoned to attend the funeral of Miss Alice Drablow, the sole inhabitant of Eelmarsh House. The house stands at the end of a causeway, wreathed in fog and mystery, but it is not until he glimpses a wasted young woman, dressed all in black, at the funeral, that a creeping sense of unease begins to take hold, a feeling deepened by the reluctance of the locals to talk of the woman in black and her terrible purpose. So that captures a lot of what goes on in this book, and it leads nicely into me talking about Susan Hill's ability as a writer to work on character. Now, the woman in black is introduced quite early on into the story, but our main character, Arthur Kipps, doesn't actually know that she's a ghost at this point in the story. And that's early on, it's not a spoiler, so you're all good there. And he sees her with these like marks, pock marks and like sores on her face, and she's often described throughout the book and in the blurb as looking wasted. Not drunk wasted, wasted. Something I really like about this is the creepiness of the character's reluctance, and often the case, complete refusal to divulge information that would help Arthur Kipps, or that would at least inform him of why people behave the way they do and why they're looking at him the way they are whilst he's there. Because what he's done is travel from London up to a fictional place on the northeast coast of England. He's attending a funeral, and he's going to be dealing with a few of her legal affairs that you would end up doing at the end of life. And being isolated where it adds to the gothic theme and tone of the book. And so these locals then, the people that he meets, they're really reluctant to say things, and they often sort of change the subject or ignore him or just go around the subject and speak about other stuff, instead of just telling him some information when he's brought up seeing the woman in black. And it does make it tense and suspenseful and creepy when he's already at the arse end of nowhere, and the fact that he doesn't know anyone and doesn't necessarily know where he's going, he's feeling even worse because nobody's helping him out. They're sort of trying to be helpful to him, but not with this information that he needs or he's looking for once he thinks something might be going on. And the horror in this book, the bad things, they still happen despite the characters withholding this information. And so that's sort of a lesson in life. Like, you no point in bottling stuff up, because things will still happen and that stuff might still come to the surface anyway. So it's best to talk about things. That might not have been the intended message, but anyway. And so when we get to this little town on the northeast of England, then we meet a couple of characters. One is the property agent, the estate agent, who's looking after the house now. It's nobody's owned it because the owner has died. You realise he has more to play in this, or he's got more of a past with this woman in black, and that gets unfolded over the story. That you get told a bit of backstory about him, and also about a guy who gives him a lift to this house and back, because it's way down a road, and the house is isolated at the end of that road, and a tide comes in, so you can only access it, get to and from it in a short window every day. And those two characters that we meet, you get a bit of backstory and a bit of depth to them, which adds to the story as well and fleshes it out and fleshes out the lore of the woman in black and what her purpose actually is. But those two characters as well are also not helpful with information. They're also stingy with the information that they have. And as we go on and find out, we sort of understand why those two characters in particular wouldn't want to be talking about this that much. Then we meet another character called Samuel Daly, who he meets on this train, on the last leg of his journey up to Crithin Griffith, it's called, this fictional town. And sort of befriends him and has a chat on the train with him. And he ends up living in the same place where this Arthur Kipps is going to. So they sort of become friends in the short period of time that they know one another and are in that area. So this Samuel Daly has a dog who he sort of loans to Arthur Kipps to take up to this house, so he's got some company. And I won't go into too much detail about the dog, but it's a cool, it's almost a character, the dog. Doesn't speak or anything like that, if that's what you're expecting, it doesn't do that, but the dog called Spider develops a good relationship pretty quickly with Arthur Kipps, and it's sort of, I enjoyed the sections of the story with the dog in it. And the innkeeper helps Arthur, broadly speaking, with the area that he's in, and also specifically with food to take up for him to eat whilst he's doing work at this house, sorting through all the old papers. But the innkeeper as well is also a bit stingy with the information, so there's all these creepy characters keeping Arthur Kipps at arm's length. And now the writing in this book, even though there's a lot of character work and it's only 200 pages and I think there's a lot done with character, but the writing in this book is one of the strongest, if not the strongest point of the story. It's got that pulp fiction style of prose. It's really strong and active in the voice. And I've grown to enjoy this style of prose a lot whilst I've been reading H.P. Lovecraft's work. I took a step or two out from under the shadow of the house so that I could see around me in the moonlight. Monk's Peace stands at the summit of land that rises gently up for some 400 feet, and where the little River Knee traces its winding way in a north to south direction across this fertile and sheltered part of the country. Below us are pastures, interspersed with small clumps of mixed broadleaf woodland, but at our backs, for several square miles, it is a quite different area of rough scrub and heathland. A patch of wildness in the midst of a well-farmed country. We are but 2 miles from a good-sized village, 7 from the principal market town, yet there is an air of remoteness and isolation which makes us feel ourselves to be much further from civilization. So that bit that I read at the start, that's the first couple of pages. So you've got this sweeping description, and it does start a little bit before then and carry on a bit after. But I'm not a narrator, and you've got better things to do than listen to me read all day. So we've got this sweeping cinematic description, but what Susan Hill is good at is changing the tone and going up a gear and moving it into a bit of a darker direction. So when Arthur Kipps changes from the main train that he's on and gets on a smaller local train to taking the last leg of his journey, the tone shifts there, but so does the quality of his transport. It's a moodier tone, but it's a worse quality train. It's not as good, it's not as luxurious than the one he's just been on. So this is the part where we meet Samuel Daly, who gives him the dog, and this is the bit where we get the first sign that people might be a little bit evasive when they're talking about a certain area, the area where he's going to. But this is also where we can start to feel the story building up to something might be about to happen or happen at some point when he gets there. And then we meet this character who gives him the lift on the pony and trap to and from the house while he does the work. And we get that big sweeping cinematic description of the journey through like there. You get the scenery, and it's all really nice and the prose is great. And then it remains great, but it switches, the tone changes again from like just describing the nice area, the nice views and what have you, to, you know, much darker when we see the house and there's mists and stuff like that, and it gets a bit creepier. So what Susan Hill does there is what she did on the train, is she switched it up and you know, went up a gear and changed it so that the creepiness starts to creep in, and it sets the tone for when he gets to the house, which is he's going to have a supernatural occurrence, obviously. And what Susan Hill does really well from the very beginning, from page 6, is she foreshadows the supernatural elements of the story, and she does that really well and really subtly, but also very satisfying. So I'll read you this paragraph. I nodded, but, quite unable to impart to him any of my extreme emotions, turned my back upon him and walked a few yards up the slope from where I could see the entrance to the old overgrown orchard that lay behind the house and petered out in long grass and tangled thicket at the far end. Beyond that, I glimpsed the perimeter of some rough-looking open land. The feeling of conviction I have described was still upon me, and I remember that I was alarmed by it, for I had never been an imaginative or fanciful man, and certainly not one given to visions of the future. Indeed, since those earlier experiences, I had deliberately avoided all contemplation of any remotely non-material matters. So that, where he's talking about non-material matters and having conviction that he touched on it earlier, that's it, setting up the supernatural, where he's going to struggle to handle these supernatural experiences because he's given no time to any non-material matters. And another way, a few pages later, that's 8 pages later, that his family and they're telling ghost stories on Christmas Eve, you know, in the front room, and that's setting it up as well. And he's asked to tell a story. He's like, your turn, you tell us one. And this is happening after the fact, and he has the ghost story. It's the story of the woman in black, and so he refuses to tell a story, but then he goes away and he writes it down, so it's almost like he's telling us the story, or we're reading his writings after he's done it. And I think that withholding of information from the characters is also something that adds to the you know, the building of tension and the supernatural element. And I'll read you this. So I wrote here that the creepy, secretive people are trying to help, but obviously are keeping something from him. They start to talk, but pause, consider their wording, and then say something else. So I'll read you this paragraph where what made me write that. He stood for a moment, looking at me closely, and I again felt it necessary to apologise for having had him get up and come down to let me in the previous night. He shook his head. Oh, I had rather that than have you spend an uncomfortable night anywhere else. So that character, that's the innkeeper, obviously knows that it would be an uncomfortable night if he were to stay at Eel Marsh House, where Mrs. Alice Drablow lived, who'd now passed away. He suspects the woman in black will have something to do with it. And so obviously our main character, Arthur Kipps, does go on to have a supernatural experience or two. But when he comes back from the house, from like what I quoted earlier, where he's not entertaining non-material matters, his behaviour to the other characters, who almost certainly know that something has happened, is like nothing has happened at all. He's cheerful and he's being a bit jolly and talking as if nothing has happened. So that's his way of handling dealing with the supernatural experiences, which was foreshadowed earlier. I think he's doing this as a way to handle the experience, the way to deal with it, and also to keep hold of his like mental strength and sanity. And then I think this because it sort of comes full circle when he starts to try and justify him thinking about not going back up to this house. And I'll read you this paragraph. A man may be accused of cowardice for fleeing away from all manner of physical dangers, but when things supernatural, insubstantial and inexplicable threaten not only his safety and well-being, but his sanity, his innermost soul, then retreat is not a sign of weakness, but the most prudent course. And I've referred several times to Eel Marsh House, this isolated house and stuff, but I do need to suggest, because of the cover as well, there's a house on it. I do need to tell you this isn't a haunted house story, this is a ghost story, and that will become clear to you when you go ahead and read it. And it's super gothic as well, the gothic themes in there, the gothic tone, the theme of isolation, and the themes of like bad weather. All these gothic themes are blended together really well. And on top of that, you've obviously got the supernatural stuff, and you've got this sort of old crumbling big house that's isolated. It's all these things have blended together really well in this novella, what is essentially a novella. It's not a novel, it's 200 pages. but it's awesome. It's really, really good. This is a Bookish Report approved book. You should go and get into this. It's obviously Gaslamp. It's got a car in it briefly. This Samuel Daly's quite wealthy and drives a car, so I'm not entirely sure. I should have checked this of the period that it's set, but I would say it may be around like the First World War. It's not super technologically advanced. If you've seen the adaptation, you'll know what I mean. It's not of a recent era. But anyway, that's been my review of The Woman in Black. Absolutely, without doubt, a 5-star book. I'd definitely recommend you go and get that as soon as possible if you haven't read it yet, and I'd recommend rereading it. That was a reread for me, obviously, because I speak about it quite a bit in my introductions, but this is my outro now, so that's going to do it for this one. If you like this video, or if you like some of the books that I'll be talking about on the channel, similar to The Woman in Black, then consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one.